We will start by the alif in its isolated form. So vertical line, then the hamza. The hamza, we start inclined line, and then we go that way. So the initial form of the alif is similar to the isolated form, vertical line, then hamza. The medial form, we start horizontally on the line, and then we go vertical up, and then the hamza. And at the end of the word, it's similar to the middle form. For the ba, the isolated form is like that. At the beginning, we write just half of it, so vertical, then horizontal line, and the dot below the line. For the middle, ba, we start horizontal, then vertical, then horizontal, and the dot below the line. At the end of the word, we start horizontal, then we write the isolated form. For the ta, it's similar to the ba. So we start vertical, then horizontal, and we put two dots above it. You can write it also in this way, so the base is similar, but you put a dash inside instead of two dots. At the beginning of the word, you draw similar to the ba, and you use either dots or a dash. At the middle, also the same. Here I will use a dash. And at the end, similar to the ba. So here I use two dots. For the tha, we write similar to the ba and the ta, and we put three dots above it. You can, however, write it using a triangle. This way is used widely in daily lives. The initial form is similar to ba, but we use triangle instead of dot. The medial form, again the same way. And the final form, we write the isolated form preceded by a horizontal line. For the jim, we start here, we go up, and we go below the line, and we write the dots. The beginning form, we start similar to the isolated form, and we finish in the horizontal line. We put dot below the line. For the medial form, we draw horizontal line, then we draw exactly the same as the initial form and a dot below. You can also write it in this way, like a half Z, and you put dot below the line. For the final form, you start on the line, horizontal line, and you draw the isolated form, and you put a dot. You can keep a space here or close them, it's not a big issue. You can also write it in this way, similar to the medial form, using Z, and you put a dot. For the ha, it's exactly the same as the jim, but without a dot. So, like this. The initial form, same way. The medial form, horizontal line, then we draw the initial form. And the final form, start horizontal line, then we draw the isolated form. For the kha, it's the same way for the kha, but the dot is above it. For the initial form, again, same way, and a dot above it. For the medial form, we put the initial form preceded by a horizontal line. And the final form, we draw similar to the isolated form. For the dal, it's easy. It's just like a 90 angle, a little less than the 90. This is the isolated form. This is the initial form, similar to the isolated form. For the medial form, we just preceded it by a horizontal line, then we draw the isolated form, and the final form is exactly the same as the medial one. For the dal, it's exactly the same as the dal, but we put a dot above it. So this is the initial form. This is the medial form. And this is the final form. For the raw, some of it is below the line, some of it above the line. So this is the isolated form. The initial form is similar to the isolated form. The medial form, we start horizontal line on the line, then we go a little up, then we go back down. So it's just horizontal line and the isolated form. The final form is similar to the medial form because it cannot be followed by any letter, so there is always space after the raw. For the zay, similar to the raw, but we put a dot above it. So this is the isolated form. This is the initial form. The medial form, a horizontal line. Then we draw the isolated form, put a dot. And the final form is similar to the medial form. For the scene, you start by a vertical line, then you go one more up, then one more again, and then you go below the line. You can also write it in a different way, a faster way. You start like this below the line, and you draw horizontal line, and you draw the final part of it. For the initial form, you just draw the beginning of the isolated form. So you have to always have three small vertical lines, or in this way it's just like that. For the medial form, it's similar to the initial form, but preceded by a horizontal line and then three small vertical lines. For the final form, it's similar to the isolated form, and preceded by a horizontal line. You can also do it in a faster way, just like this. Also, it works. For the sheen, it's similar to the scene, but we put 3 points above it, or as we saw previously, a triangle. For the initial form, similar to the scene, with triangle above it. For the medial form, again the same way, and for the final form in the same way. So there are 3 vertical lines plus the triangle. For the sod, you start a little below the line and you go like this. Make it a little bit larger. Okay, so this is the isolated form. For the initial form, you draw the same way and you add this vertical line. So this vertical line is equivalent to this big thing here. So it's just the beginning of this one, and it has always to have one of them, either this way when it's isolated form or at the end of the word, or just a small one when it's in the initial form or in the medial form. For the medial form, you draw a horizontal line, then you draw the initial form. For the final form, you draw a horizontal line, then you draw the isolated form. For the dot, it's exactly the same way as the sod, but you add a dot above it. So, like this. For the initial form, you have to add this small vertical line and a dot. For the medial form, the same way, but preceded by a horizontal line. For the final form, for the ta, it's similar to the sa and dad, but without the final part of it. And we add a small vertical line above it. So you will see that it's similar in the initial form as the isolated form. This vertical line can be here or here, it's not a big issue. For the medial form, it's similar to the isolated form and to the initial form, but preceded by a horizontal line. And you add this vertical line, and at the end, again, the same as the medial form. For the dha, it's similar to the ta, but with a dot above it. So dot and this vertical line. For the initial form, exactly the same as the isolated form. For the medial form, we precede it by a horizontal line. Similarly for the final form. For the ayn, you start from the right, then you go below, then again right, and then you go below the line. For the initial form, you draw just the first part of it, and you finish on the line. So let me repeat this. For the medial form, we draw it usually a horizontal line, then you go and revert to the triangle, then you finish in the horizontal line. For the final form, you can draw a horizontal line and then draw the isolated form connected to the horizontal line, or in a faster way, you can draw a horizontal line, then you go triangle, inverted triangle, and you go below the line. For the ghain, it's similar to the ayn, but with dot above it. So we start in the same way. In the initial form, the same way also with a dot. In the medial form, you draw inverted triangle plus a dot above it. For the final form, you start on the line, horizontal line. Then you draw the isolated form, or you go using the inverted triangle and a dot above it. For the fa, you start by drawing a small circle and you end on the line with a dot above it. This is for the isolated form. For the initial form, you draw just the first part of it with a dot above it. For the medial form, you start horizontal line, then you draw a circle, and then you finish in the horizontal line. And for the final form, you draw just the isolated form, and before it you draw a horizontal line and then a dot above it. The qaf, you start similar to the fa, and you go a little below the line. So let me repeat this. And you put either two dots or a dash similar to the ta. The initial part of it, you just finish on the line and you use either two dots or a dash. For the medial form, you draw a circle and two horizontal lines and then the dash. For the final form, you draw the isolated form and then two dots or a dash. For the kaf, The isolated form, you go horizontal line and you finish on line, and then you put Hamza, so vertical line, horizontal line, then Hamza. The initial form is different from the isolated form, so you go inclined line, then vertical line, or you can do it even inclined on the other side, and then horizontal line. So it's an inverted Z actually. For the medial form, you go horizontal line, then you draw similar to the initial form, and then don't forget to draw another horizontal line after it. For the final form, you draw similar to the horizontal one with a Hamza. For the lam, you start vertical and you end below the line. The initial form, you just end on the line, and the medial form, you go horizontal, vertical, then horizontal line. And the final form, you go horizontal, then up, vertical, and then you go a little below the line and you draw the isolated form. For the meme, you draw a circle, then horizontal line, then vertical line below the horizontal line. The initial form, you start a little above the line, you go a little inclined line, then up, then you go below to draw the beginning part of the meme, but it's an opposite circle. The medial form is similar to the initial one. So if you start in the horizontal way, you go a little up, and then you draw this circle on the horizontal line. For the final form, we are on the horizontal line. We start similar way to the medial form, and then we go below. So like this. Okay. For the noon, it's an easy letter, so we draw just like that and a dot above it. In the initial form, we draw just vertical, then horizontal line, and then a dot above it. For the medial form, horizontal, then vertical, then horizontal, and a dot. For the final form, we draw the isolated form preceded by a horizontal line. For the ha, we write it in this way. We repeat it. So we end on the horizontal line. So this is the isolated form. The initial form is exactly the same as the isolated form. The medial form is a little different, so we start horizontal line and you go inclined to the left, then you go up and you finish by a horizontal line. For the final form, you draw horizontal and then vertical, and then you end it in this way. Or if it's preceded by like waw or ra, you just draw a circle on the line. For the waw, you start on the horizontal line, you draw a circle and you go like the ra below the line. Let me repeat this. So a circle, then you go as the ra. So this is the isolated form. This is the initial form similar to the isolated form. For the medial form, it's again the same way, but we start by a horizontal line. And for the final form, it's similar to the medial one. For the ya, we start a little above the line and we go this way. And we put two dots, or we can use a dash. For the initial form, we draw it as the ba, but we use two dots or a dash below it instead of one dot. For the medial form, again similar to the ba, but with a dash. For the final form, we draw similar to the isolated form, but preceded by a horizontal line. Now let me show you the final one, which is not a letter, it is the special case of the ta. So it is just a circle with 2 dots above it. This is the ta. Or you can put a dash instead. There is no initial form and medial form, so it's only a final form. It can be either like the ha, but with 2 dots above it, or a dash or a 2 dots. So let me separate them. So if you want to do it using the dash, it's in this way. Using 2 dots, it's similar, 2 dots. And if it's preceded by ra or zay, we write the isolated form either using 2 dots or a dash.